Hey Nicole,
Can you see my video?
not yet. Yeah, now we can see you. Nicole, thanks for joining us on stage. We also have Jivraj with us on stage. So I'll give a very quick introduction about Nicole and Jivraj, and then probably we'll get started. And again, sorry guys for the delay due to some technical issues. The whole thing was delayed. So quick thing about Nicole. Nicole is a principal at Hurling Capital, and she's one of a proponent of helping a lot of people and break into VC. She publishes this amazing runs this newsletter called VC Demystified. Even I used to read that, still read that. One of the best newsletter I have subscribed to. If not, you should already subscribe. We're gonna put about that here. So please do check the VC Demystified newsletter. Highly recommended for anyone. Even if you are in VC, there are few granularities like how she breaks up is like things is like very cool. And about Jivraj, Jivraj is the founder of Indian Silicon Valley Capital, Angel Syndicate, and Jivraj also runs this podcast called Indian Silicon Valley, which is nearly around 100K subscribers in YouTube. Yes, with a lot of these amazing founders. Uh, uh, I'll give a very quick 1 minute for Nicole to and Jivraj to give an introduction, and then probably we can get started. Nicole, do you wanna give a very quick intro?
Yeah, awesome. So I'm Nicole, principal at a firm called Harlem Capital, which is a diversity-focused early stage fund investing in women and people of color at the seed stage. We are a newer fund, so we're still on our fund two.
Nicole, your voice is a bit low, if you don't mind.
Let me see if I can hold it here. I'm at a coffee shop, so if you hear any background noises, let me know. But this is better if I hold it.
It's still low.
Okay, let me see if I can fix that. One second.
Maybe Jivraj, in the meantime, can you give a very quick introduction about yourself?
Sure, happy to. Am I audible?
Yeah, you are loud and clear, Jivraj.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Pavitran, for that kind welcome. Really glad to be here and talking to all of you. I've been building the Indian Silicon Valley podcast for the last 3 years now. It's a podcast focused on entrepreneurship, primarily in India, where we demystify how to build a startup which is technology backed. The idea is that the knowledge to build a startup should not be proprietary anymore, especially in an ecosystem which is developing and thriving like India. And I started with that objective, and I was unable to build my own company about 3 years back. We now hosted 200 founders, 40 unicorn founders out of those, approximately 5 billionaires, and some public company founders as well. And it's been an incredible run. We're going to hit about 100K subscribers on YouTube, and consistently we've been able to put out episodes in the last some 200 episodes in 3.5 years. So it's been a phenomenal run. That in turn has helped me build out my investment arm, which is called Indian Silicon Valley Capital. We do about 150K check. We've invested in about 30 companies. We're sector agnostic, but the idea is to provide the base with the podcast, use that as a way to attract proprietary deal flow, win proprietary deals, and invest capital. That becomes the overall loop. And yes, I'm delighted to be here. Currently, we're at an AUM of 5 million. If you want to know about podcasting, or you invest, or you're building a company, more than happy to chat ever. I'm always very approachable across LinkedIn, Instagram, WhatsApp, whatnot.
Thank you, Jivraj. So Jivraj is like India's Harry Stubbings. So again,
Thank you.
Nicole, can you give a very quick intro about yourself?
Yeah, can you hear me now? Is it less low or is it still as low?
It's better. It's
It,
still
it's slightly better.
yeah.
I'm
Now
kind
it's
of
better. Now it's better.
okay. Hopefully this will continue to work. If not, I might have to move locations, which will take a minute. But I'm Nicole. As I mentioned before, I'm an investor at a firm called Harlem Capital, which is a diversity-focused fund investing in people of color at the seed stage. I over time have been in venture for about 4 or 5 years now. I have been posting about demystifying venture for probably 4 of those 5 years. And a lot of it is centered around this idea that venture is sort of a black box for a lot of people, for those looking to break in, but also for founders looking for funding. And as someone who uh, was in finance, I did investment banking prior to coming into venture. I didn't really know that early stage venture existed. And so, as somebody who's sitting in a finance seat and still didn't know that it existed, I realized that there was a gap in knowledge, and it's the best way to build generational wealth is to be an entrepreneur. And so access to that information being gated, I saw as a huge problem. And as a result, I now post a ton of content online about demystifying venture on Twitter, LinkedIn mostly. And now I recently, as of 6 months ago, launched a newsletter called VC Demystified, which essentially goes out every Sunday and is deep dives on various different topics in venture, from super niche to sort of like how to break in, and all the tips and tricks that I've learned now sitting on the other side. Yeah, happy to be here and glad to share the stage with you.
Like,
Thank you, Nicole. Nicole, your voice is a bit feeble. Maybe you can try a little bit
Yeah,
louder.
I can try different headphones, but I'm worried that it's going to pick up on the background noise. But let me try.
Sure. Uh, so, Jivraj, probably we can get started. Maybe just to set a opening context, right? Can you share your journey, how you got started into the content side of things? Like, how did this whole thing started for you?
sure, happy to. For me, in my case, at the time when I began in India, there weren't as many content-led brands or as many VCs attempting content either. So I didn't have a clear benchmark. And my objective at the time was also simpler, which is that, hey, I come from Calcutta myself, and the pain point was deep. I didn't have access to a network, and because I was not in a Bangalore, Delhi, Gurgaon, Pune, Maharashtra, Mumbai, whatnot, which meant that I had to figure out these networks for myself and rely on the internet for a lot of support. So for me, the idea was, hey, let's just be super authentic and curious, and hopefully there are more people like my own self who will benefit from this content. I didn't complicate. I actually tried to do the simplest thing, which was, hey, record on Zoom calls. And that was familiar at the time. Everybody was accustomed to Zoom. Everybody was at home. Entrepreneurs had relatively more time and were more open to sharing their stories because we were starting to see early signs of success. And that all of it came along to, for my first 15, 20 episodes where I would just record, put it out on Spotify. Initially, I started seeing folks resonate with what I was trying to do, and that meant it became simpler to appeal to people like myself. One thing led to another. I think the key was to not get ahead of myself and expect too much from something like this. Thankfully, I was parallelly working at AngelList India, where I spent about 3 odd years, and that meant that content was not something that I solely relied upon, and people also saw some amount of credibility because of my work at AngelList. This played really well into my content journey. So, long story short, I ended up staying really consistent while having provided deep value to the people who were listening. I did not obsess too much about how many people were listening, but I obsessed instead about the quality that people were receiving from my content. And that has compounded really well over a period of time. In fact, as we reach scale on content finally after 3.5 4 years, there are still people who've been following me since the initial days, since I was at a couple of single thousand digit numbers. And they have also come in and said that, hey, your quality has remained the same and gotten better, if not worse, which means that you don't dilute it. And I have stayed true to my word of consistency. So I think my journey at the start was also to learn all of it. I didn't know how to sort of build an audio podcast, a video podcast, edit. I remember still learning from scratch on YouTube multiple things, how to publish, how to edit, how to frame questions, all of it. I put in a lot of work and I continue doing so. But is extremely gratifying, considering the learning you get to put out and observe yourself. I'm happy to take a pause here, but I think the summary was, don't get ahead of yourself. Stay consistent, and if you recognize that your strength is going to be depth, then double down on that strength. Don't blindly chase numbers. I see sometimes people do that because people are more attracted towards the scale of somebody's content, not the quality, because the quality is not as visible. But I do think that quality triumphs quantity all the time. That's my 2 cents. Nicole, are you back?
Possibly. I don't know. These headphones tend to make a lot of background noise, so can you hear me better with these, or can you
Yeah.
hear a lot of background?
It is a bit on the higher side, but I think some folks in the chat have mentioned that they've been able to turn on captions and it's probably working for them. Do we want to give it a shot again?
Yeah, the only other, if you let me in on my phone, I could potentially do that. I'm not sure why I know these headphones can pick up the background noise, which is why I was using the other ones. But yeah,
Got it. No, I think we can still make do with some amount of this, and maybe just to give it an attempt further instead of not being able to continue. Unless it's too bad, we can have somebody in the audience perhaps guide us on that. But do you want to share how the early journey was for you?
sure. Can you repeat the question so that I kind of came in
Yeah,
and
no, I think Pavitran guided us by just walking us through the early journey. I quickly shared how it was for me during the early days. What was it like for you? How did you get started on the content journey?
awesome. Yeah, and I'll try my phone if this is not working. Sorry for the technical difficulties, but how did I get started? Honestly, it was an accident. I joined Venture, and the firm that I had joined is very media heavy as well. So if you guys follow Harlem Capital, you'll know that each partner and almost everybody on the team has a media presence. And so when I joined, they basically asked me. They didn't ask; they were just recommended that I build some sort of public presence. And so I ended up posting online very infrequently. Was very intimidated by it, and eventually, what had happened was I needed to change my mindset. The biggest thing for me was I equated professional social media with personal social media. And for me, personal social media is not something that I do today, and I didn't do it then either. And so I needed to switch my mindset. And what I ended up doing was like any other work project. I was like, I need to figure out how to get this done. If I was asked to do an investment memo, I would figure out a way to get it done. And so I came up with this very unsexy plan, honestly, to post twice a day on Twitter at 11 and 5 p.m. on 5 different topics. And those 5 topics I chose based on like what I thought that I had slightly above sort of like knowledge on, and something that I also thought that I could post that frequently on. So I came up with those 5 topics. Over time, I just kept posting 11 and 5, 11 and 5. And it didn't matter how many likes I got, it didn't matter at all. What I was trying to do is test what the audience wanted. And so I ended up posting on those 5 topics and realizing over time there were certain topics that people wanted to hear from me on, and there were certain topics that people did not want to hear. And so over time, after A/B testing those, I whittled it down from 5 to 4 to 3 to 2 to 1 to get super niche, right? And because I went super niche, which is this demystifying venture, particularly for aspiring VCs, I ended up building an audience because everybody knew what to come to me for. That's my biggest recommendation is in building a brand is you have to be known for one thing and then you can expand from there. And so in the early days, a lot of it was just testing. A lot of it was testing and um, you know, changing my mindset towards what it meant to build a professional brand versus, it's about me and Nicole and my personal brand. So that's sort of my early days. And I think consistency is probably the number one thing when it comes to this is it takes time. Like, I don't know if you guys know Harry Stephens. Like, I think he did over 100 podcasts before 200 podcasts before someone even listened to it, right? So, and now he has the biggest brand adventure I think we've ever seen. So, consistency is key here.
That's good. Do you want to like share anything further, or I can also like we can keep this conversation flowing, Nicole and I, and maybe just you know talk to each other on what the nuances. I completely reckon with the consistency point. It's taken me, I think it took me a good 1.5, 2 years to find my feet from an audience POV myself. So completely acknowledge. I'd love to understand from you, Nicole, and maybe I can chime in once you share thoughts as well on how this has flown back into the venture side of things, right? Sometimes making that correlation is not as easy as it looks from the outside. Maybe like folks think that it leads to, I don't know, optimized deal flow, top of funnel, which may not necessarily be true. So I'd love to know what your experience there has been. So the content to capital journey, how has that helped you? I'd love to know.
Yeah, yeah. So I think the way that I see the content having a brand adventures, I think it does help quite a lot. I see it more as like indirect. So for example, like everything about ventures about networking, right? Any intro you can make for portfolio companies for support, deal sourcing. You need to stay top of mind for VCs, for founders reaching out directly to you. They need to know that you exist. And so the way that I see networking is you win at networking when you're able to stay top of mind in a low touch way, right? And for me personally, that has been social media because it doesn't mean that's the person. Like, let's say a VC reads my tweet, it might not be relevant for them, right? But they're still seeing my name pop up, and just by seeing my name pop up, they'll think of things that they had for me. Maybe they have a deal for me, right? Or maybe we haven't caught up in a while or things like that, right? And they'll think, oh, I haven't talked to Nicole in a while. I need to share this with her. Whereas if they didn't see my name, they wouldn't think to do that. And so for me, it's been more the indirect things that I think come from social than the necessarily direct inbounds, though that is part of it as well. And I think, building a brand adventure is you kind of have to do it, whether you choose to do it publicly or not, right? I would say externally, which is what I chose to do, or you can do it internally, which is just like building your brand through reputation and networking. But you have to build a brand. It's like not an option not to. And honestly, like makes it much easier walking into a room when people feel like they know you. I don't know if you guys know Andrew Chen at A16Z. He basically,
Sure.
I was watching a panel, and he was basically saying that media allows people to have a false sense of closeness to you. So when you walk in a room, even though they've never talked to you one on one, they feel like they because they've been reading your tweets and you've been providing them with information, right? And so it makes networking easier because people feel closer to you immediately. And I've definitely felt that where there's been instant sort of connection with people just because they're like, oh, I've seen your content. I feel like I know you. So those have been ways that has sort of helped me, but would love to hear, your take on it as well.
Yeah. No, I completely resonate with all that you said. To be very honest, I have observed the very same. I do want to clarify that it's not as simple as hey, content or a personal brand on a particular platform leads to higher amount of deal flow or higher filtered deal flow. Even if it does, if anything, in my opinion, while it increases inbound, it may not necessarily increase quality inbound. So I don't think that should be your reason to start content. And if you do it for that reason, I don't think you really win. I do think in my case, it's helped me win competitive deals. So that's interesting, right? Because I have a perceived sense of credibility. I do think it definitely helps me win deals because once you put out your own work, right, your insights, your thoughts, in my case, my questions, my learnings, my network, I am able to build an impression to the other side, which is more meaningful than the other person or another investor, which brings more gravitas into the room. And I do think that helps me win enough. So, from an access layer, does it improve top of funnel? No. But does it help win? Definitely. It's helped me do that in many instances, especially in my case. Since I was relatively young in the ecosystem at the time, it helped me further. I do agree with the top of mind recall point of view as well. I think by default you become known in the ecosystem, credible, you're top of mind to founders, to investors alike, to your peer ecosystem, which contributes in a meaningful manner. What's also very underrated is the fact that, hey, you just by virtue of what you do stand out, right? Like everybody else is investing, you are investing and doing this, which means that you have a distinct personality to begin with. You can have a unique conversation at any given point in time, and you have higher recall that all compounds in the long run. So yeah, the benefits have been massive. You get to have access to rooms that you otherwise wouldn't have, considering like to like investing skills. So I think if you are good at your art of investing, content just amplifies what you do on the investing side in more ways than one. And then it plays a great role in winning, in creating recall, in ensuring that you are distinct, and which all of which compounds into becoming a better investor because your access net net really improves. So I think that's how it's played along for me.
Yeah, I completely agree with all of those points. Especially, I think a lot of people do it, thinking that they're going to get so much more sourcing from, being a public brand. And I agree with your point. I think it creates a lot of inbounds, but not necessarily quality inbounds. So completely aligned there. Also, it moves, so hopefully the background noise is slightly better.
Yeah, I think it's getting better with each answer, so that's helpful. I think one of the other things that I feel is a bit underrated is I think the constant debate is how do you like sometimes the audience within venture or within founders can be a bit restricted, so it becomes easy to dilute the value of what you're trying to do to appeal to a larger base of people. But do you have thoughts on do you face this problem yourself? And if yes, how have you navigated it? Like, how have you thought about increasing the scope of your content, if at all that's a question?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I'm niche, but I also feel like I can sort of expand out of it because I can really talk about any venture topic, right? I stay niche by saying that I am targeting sort of aspiring VCs looking to break into venture, particularly, right? That has always been the biggest audience I've had. And I think I get, sort of ancillary groups who just want to learn about venture because part of breaking into venture is also learning about venture, right? Um, but I think that I haven't gotten to a point where I've needed to expand beyond any sort of venture topics. Um, but it's interesting when I go to different area topics, and I'm curious if this is something that you've experienced too. Is I have to stay pretty focused on what I usually post about. If I go outside the bounds, typically, like let's say I post something like motivational, people don't really like it. You know what I mean? Like it does not really
Yeah.
hit my audience. And I don't know if that's because they are used to seeing one thing from me. And when it's not that, they then are like a little confused. But I haven't, I think to date, I have my like one pillar which stays the same. And then I test things on the outside still related to venture. But I haven't built like, necessarily another brand next to the breaking into VC brand.
Got it. No, fair enough. I think in the middle there was somewhat of a plateau that I was starting to observe, but within that itself, I think the smart thing to do and to not get ahead of yourself is to just stay course with what people look at you and come to you for. So I completely agree. People have to know what you stand for, and digressions don't really help because once they see that your value and depth and knowledge base is diluted by virtue of you trying to do too much, I think they don't trust you anymore, and then you lose what you stand for. So I completely agree. I think I don't think I've tried enough, but I've always believed that one form of compounding is just way better than trying to do too much or expand, because even at a smaller base, if the problem statement is that you will remain small because of a limited time, which may not be the case to begin with. But even if that's the question, I do think you'll have better quality in general to appeal to the audience, right? So I think that just plays out well.
Yeah. I also think like, and I said this a few answers back, but you need to be known for something. I think, but you need to have like a one-liner that people can say about you, right? And so, for example, like anybody who wants advice on how to break into venture capital, I'm the first name that pops up for everybody, right? So I talk to a ton of VCs who have broken it, right? Who are maybe not my audience, um, literally are like, oh my God, Nicole, you have helped me sort of so much because every single inbound I've gotten from an aspiring VC, I send them right to your pages. Right. And I can't count how many times that has happened. Right. And the only reason that has happened is because I've stayed consistent to sort of this one liner with all of my content. And I'd say that's what I recommend you doing. Right. Like some people are like the pricing guy. Right. All they do is talk about pricing. Right. And like those types of things, like it makes it very easy to get referrals and to build your audience through word of mouth. When you try to go too broad, it doesn't work because you don't have that one liner
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree. I strongly resonate with that, and that's very, very good advice. Also, by the way, like whoever's listening, we'd love to make this collaborative. Instead of answering our own questions, we'd be more than happy to facilitate any questions that you have, so we don't have to necessarily wait for the last couple of minutes to make that happen. I do think there's a question which says, does it help while raising with LPs too? Do you have an opinion on that, Nicole? Has content help you with LP credibility?
So I do less of the LP side of things. That more falls on the managing partners at Harlem Capital. I will say though that we have gotten LP, like quality LP inbounds from our content. And so I do think it helps. I don't think it's going to raise your entire fund, but I do think that it helps. And just for context, like Harlem Capital is a diversity focused fund, as I mentioned. We started about 7 years ago, before diversity investing was seen as like a true asset class. I think things started to pick up over the last 4 or 5 years in that space, and now LPs can wrap their head around it. But when Henri and Jared went out to basically fundraise for their fund one, and they said that their focus was they're going to invest in women and people of color, LPs would look at them and say, that's really great, but like, what industry are you investing in? Right? It wasn't seen as something that could be, a fund. And so they started posting all of this content because they needed to prove that there were enough founders and that the market was big enough for them to have a fund focused on that demographic. And so a lot of the content that we do now was born out of this idea that we need to create the market and we need to prove to people that there's enough of us out there. And so, yeah, I would say I don't necessarily know if it's going to raise your fund, but I don't think it's going to hurt your fund either, because we know, LPs are always looking at our socials, and we've gotten a few quality inbounds, but yeah, that's sort of my take on it. But I'm not as close, admittedly.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, similar thoughts because I'm not close to institutional LPs either. Mine is a solo GP fund. We've deployed not consequential capital in the larger scheme of things. We've deployed about $5 million, which primarily comes from HNIs and founders who are primarily in my network. Again, it perhaps helps you win LPs because they see that you have an additional sense of credibility, something that stands out. In the Indian landscape, not many people have active podcasts which have been able to scale. So I definitely have a distinct voice and an advantage in any meeting and room. And because of that, I think ancillarily, you have a lot of insights and learnings. I think what gets missed is content, and creating content, especially, gets you started on a loop of reflection, research, confidence, articulation, all of which compounds into you presenting well, either to a founder in case you're winning a deal, or to an institutional investor, or to a individual LP as well, right? All of which is a great loop to have. So I think it's helped me win maybe a couple of LPs, or maybe a couple of quality inbounds here and there, but not anything beyond. And I wouldn't be able to speak to the institutional side. One of the interesting things, Nicole, that I get asked often on my DMs is, hey, creating a podcast or any form of content feels just cumbersome from a time lens, right? Time, effort, energy lens. And I often mention that it's actually quite the opposite, especially if you've compounded it, especially if you've built a process or a loop around it. I mean, maybe I can kick this off, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. But in my case of creating a podcast, I am dependent on somebody else, which means that, hey, I will have to schedule as per their sort of a calendar, etc., and I'll need a setup. But beyond that, a lot of the effort is actually minimal and can be streamlined to a great degree and will not hamper or come out of your diligence time and investing time per se. I do think it needs to be very naturally embedded in your habits, etc. To simplify. For instance, I know that I'm writing on LinkedIn every time I am, doing my deep work up at 9:30 to 10:30. I post at around 11 o'clock a.m. IST, which means that hey, usually I have a 15-minute window during which I'll end up penning down without structure some things that I've learned in the last couple of days. So for me, that becomes the go-to structure, and I have a weekly schedule for one podcast episode that I am releasing, for which I end up, writing a post on it. So that's broadly my sense, but I do think that it's a quite a big myth that you think that you'll have to spend significant time and energy on this. I think the underlying truth is that you need to be able to figure out an habit, a way, a process, whatever you want to call it, that just seamlessly integrates into your existing schedule, which I'm sure many of you can find if you're well intentioned to do content. And you can thus start. Effort or form of communication shouldn't be the reason to hold you against creating content, at least as per me. I'd love to hear your thoughts, Nicole.
Yeah, I haven't done a podcast solo, so I don't have the same insight into doing a podcast and the time and
Sure.
the work that's required for that. But in terms of like scheduling time for content, I think that I once you put the content hat on, you realize that anything can be content, right? A lot of what I post about is what I incur in my day to day, right? Or in speaking with individuals. And so what you realize is that once you start posting the content, it's actually a flywheel, right? Like you'll post a post, someone will ask you a question in the comments, you know exactly what your next tweet or your next post needs to be, right? Or you get DMs and people are asking you questions. Every single question that somebody asks me becomes another piece of content, right? I don't answer directly because I just don't have the bandwidth to respond to everybody directly. But if I see the question, I'm like, other people must have this, right? And so then you get your next content idea, and it becomes this flywheel, right? You post, you get comments, you get questions. You post, you get comments, you get questions, right? So almost the audience will give you what you need your content, what they want your content to be. Um, Also, what you realize in your day to day is if you have the content hat on, you know that you're looking for insights throughout your day. If the content is related to what you do, you realize that you can just jot down various different topics where you're like, oh, I just did an analysis that I think other people would like to know, in some capacity. And so then you would end up just like noting that down quickly. Um, and so I think, yeah, it's more of the like framing your brain to think like a content brain, and then you realize that it's actually all around you, and it continues to be like a flywheel.
Makes sense. Makes sense. I agree. Now that everyone's working on content, do you think there's a white space left to create your niche if you were to start today? If yes, how should one go about identifying it? Interesting. I actually believe that we're just starting, at least when it comes to the Indian landscape. I don't think there are enough high quality people creating content. So there's much more to do. The way I would identify a niche is I would look inward instead of looking externally. What are you so passionate about, or what do you have a deep insight about that you feel you could write for weeks without getting tired? And I'd start there. I'd start writing about it, which or whatever form of communication you best prefer. If it's a podcast, that's great. If it's video content, that's great. But I would start what feels natural to me, and I would start without any expectations. I think much of creating content needs to be more inward again, more self-reflection on the internet. And hey, if it does well, that's a bonus. If it doesn't, you still win because you built a process for yourself to reflect, to express, to be articulate, etc. So I do think if you start with that sort of ambition and persona, you'd probably go far. And there's definitely much more to do within the Indian landscape of venture content, of tech content, than has been explored. I do think there'll be many of these that will come up. What do you think, Nicole?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, there's so there's such a big audience on all of these platforms that I don't think that you have to worry about even a niche being taken. I think there's multiple creators within one niche, and if you produce content in a different way, um, or even take a slightly different approach, you can have the same content. Like there's tons of creators demystifying venture, right? I'm not the only creator that's doing that, and that's across any content that you could produce. So I wouldn't say that it's too saturated for you to ever get started. So that's definitely not a thing. I would say that I agree in that it has to be something that you're passionate about. It's a lot of work, right? Like it's another job, and you have to like writing about it, and you have to remain consistent. And the way to do that is to be writing about something that one you can keep consistent, right? Whether through the knowledge that you're learning, and or you're super passionate about and want to keep learning about, so that you can keep consistent about, right? And what I'll say is, you don't have to be an expert. I think this is the biggest thing that holds people back. People think I don't have a topic that I'm an expert at to feel like I should be posting about it. You don't have to be an expert. No one is saying that they're coming to you because you are the quote unquote expert, right? You can post and then you start to become the expert, right? When I first started posting, I didn't know, I didn't know that much about venture. When I started posting, I was like 1 year into venture, right? And I'm demystifying venture for everybody, right? Like when you think about it, it's like you just have a unique advantage to a subsegment of the population who has never heard of venture, right? And now I've been in venture long enough. I've learned more concepts. I've sat in the seat longer. Now my audience is broader for folks who maybe are junior VCs who are just starting, right? And so I'd say don't let not being an expert stop you. You can still have your niche regardless if there are other people in it. But again, consistency is the biggest thing. And to find your niche, honestly, you could do something like what I did. A/B test different topics. You don't have to choose one topic and stick to it just because you started with that. I would say choose, the 5 topics that you think you could want to build a brand around, and then A/B test it. Your audience is going to tell you what they want to hear from you.
Yeah.
Nicole, like one follow-on incremental question there, right? So, when you post, there's a lot of different content. You also play with, right? So, how do you know, like, okay, this is something which will not, this is something not working, and then how do you experiment, right? Like again, like sometimes if things do not work a certain format, you retry this again, or what's your framework there?
Yeah, I mean, once you start, I don't think that I have like, and I don't use software to analyze my posts, and like maybe I should. I'm just like not at that level yet. But if you post all the time, you generally know which sort of like phrases work, which like keywords work, right? And one thing I'll say is that like algorithms are really right. So what worked 6 months ago might not work today. And it's just a constant state of like testing. But what I will say is one thing that people don't see on the other end is that a post that has, let's say, a low amount of likes or low amount of comments sometimes has a ton of impressions. So you can't necessarily always say that a post that has low likes from your view doesn't have a ton of impressions. I've had posts where I'm like, this makes no sense why it has so many impressions but has like 50 likes. But the truth is that, and what I've come to realize is that there's a lot of posts because it has to do with changing positions and leaving your employer because I'm breaking into VC content. A lot of people don't want to engage with the post externally because they have their employers on these platforms, right? So if they like a post related to finding another job or like breaking into venture, it could be a signal to their employer that they want to leave, which they don't want to do, right? And so what I'd say is that like you can look at the back end impressions, you can look at how many times it was sent, you can look at all of that, and then you start to get a general sense of, okay, I know what works, what structure works, I know what structure doesn't work. But there's software you can use too. I just personally don't use it yet, but I know that there's a lot of creators software to sort of analyze and put the data behind that like intangible thought of what works and what doesn't.
Yeah.
Do
I
you use
largely
software?
agree. No, I think although like with Instagram and like YouTube, the level of data that you get to what works and what does not is just way higher. So intuitively, with a couple of scans, you'll be able to understand this is what is working and this is where you can double down versus this is what does not work. I think the nuance there is, and this was especially in my case. I don't know how it was in your case, Nicole, but I used to initially publish a lot of what I liked without really giving a lot of weightage to what the audience likes. And I think it's important to make that difference early on in your head and not be biased towards, hey, because I mean, if you're in venture, if you're in tech, if you're a founder, you're probably above average curious. So I'll give that to you. It is now your job to separate yourself from the content that you write. You write with reflection and curiosity, but you also keep an eye to this is what the audience appreciates, and that is what you have to double down on versus saying that, hey, this is what I'm curious about, and I'll continue writing on that without paying directional lens to, okay, this is what is working. I think that's what I'll probably double click on.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that like a big thing is like don't take it personally, right? Like if a piece of content doesn't work, it's not about you, right? But this is where professional presence and personal presence have a different meaning to me, right? Whereas like if someone doesn't like your photo personally, you could take that personally, maybe, right? But professionally, it's like, oh, they just didn't like the fact, or they didn't like the way I structured this post, right? It's not about you, right? It could be good content. You just didn't hack the algorithm, or they didn't like the way that you framed it. But it's not personal. Just read it, just like iterate and like figure out a new way to do it. And honestly, if you gamify it a bit in your head, it becomes fun. For me, I know that like I love to figure out how my audience wants this structured, right? Like I'm curious about how I could write the same topic in two different ways and it's perceived entirely different, right? It's like it's almost like human psychology and it's like gamified to me in a way. And so if you can come up, if you can figure that out, right? Where it's like instead of it being personal, oh man, I failed. It's more of like, okay, I'll get him next time. You know what I mean? At least in my head, that's how I think. And so I think that definitely has helped me continue and get past that phase of quote unquote not being an expert and thinking no one wants to hear from me.
Yeah.
Got it. Like one final question. There is one more on the chat, so probably we'll take this, yeah, last one.
Sure. VC funds encourage support their analysts in creating content while managing day-to-day operations. I think Nicole will be better suited to answer this question since I don't work at a fund myself.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it depends. It depends on the fund. I would say that the more established funds might have a bit of an aversion to it just because they have more compliance and more legal things where obviously you can't they essentially are more precious about their brand in that way and have legal constraints. So I'd say if you are at a bigger fund, they might not encourage you to do it. Also, if they're like a registered advisor, you're technically legally not allowed to post, right? And so I know folks who work at a venture fund who is registered as like an investment advisor, in which case they like cannot post. But outside of that, I would say generally venture is a very public facing role. And so most of the time, it's not because the fund doesn't want people to post, it's more because the VC themselves are not interested in posting. I don't know that they would encourage it. I think it's if you want to do it, they would say absolutely. But I don't know that they would sit you down and say, hey, we want you to build a public brand. I think it's just a strategy that you will either use or you won't use, and it's entirely up to your discretion. I will say though that like it can be like another job, as I mentioned. So just make sure to focus on your day-to-day operations before you decide to build a public brand, because I do think it can hinder you rather than help you if you don't manage the two properly.
I agree. I agree. On the last part, especially, I think it's important to mention.
It's one more last one. Probably we'll close with this one. Yeah.
Was there any cold outreach either by a founder for their fundraise or by a VC to share deal flow with you that caught your attention and you connected them with? So only on the basis of cold outreach, are there any creative ways?
I actually have a good example.
Sure.
Um, and it's my favorite example to share. I always tell anybody who sends me a cold email is to like make it creative, right? Make it creative and make it skimmable. Um, and one email that I got from the founder, which was in the inbound, and he was pitching his startup to me. He went through the whole pitch in the email, and then at the end he said, you know, and if you want to know how I met the Queen of England through is I don't remember exactly what it said, but it was something like and if you don't care about my startup, but you want to know how I met the Queen of England in 2005, let me know. And I just thought it was so creative to end an email like that, where it was like he did the pitch, right, and then at the end he was kind of like, I just want to get you on the phone, right, and I got on the phone with him because I thought it was so creative. Honestly, I was like, I appreciate that you went out of your way, you were bold, you caught my attention, and I'm going to give you sort of my time now. And so I'd say, you don't have to do that exactly. But I think if you try to hit on some sort of like personal thing as well, and it hits, you'll be able to get them on the phone, as opposed to just, a cold pitch being, and then you're sort of cowardly, you know? So that was one that I really, really liked.
Very interesting. And that is definitely something I've received sometimes emails, and this is something that I've done with founders that wanted to get on my show who might be a bit unreachable. Is that, figure out in the first line or two a way to help them, right? Like, so I have begun my emails by saying that, hey, this is what I thought. I hosted this person earlier in the week, and this is how they can help you. Would you like to be connected? And I also do this. Would you be interested on a podcast? The way somebody did this for me was, hey, these are the ideas that I have for your show, and you should host these people. Then they came to the pitch, and then they told me about their startup, what they want to do, etc. So I found that really creative. It just stands true to the old adage that figure out a way to help the person that you want to get help from, and inevitably they will respond to you. And I do think that just fundamentally humans are driven by, hey, he or she went out of his way to help me. Can I figure out a way to help them and give them 30 minutes of my time? I think that's the least to be over person once they've lent a hand of help. So maybe that's helpful. I don't know how innovative, pretty cliche in nature, but easier said than done. I don't think I see it in practice as much. So that could be a good cue, actually.
Yeah, and one other thing I'd say, I know that everybody like defaults to email or DMs to reach out to somebody. I actually think venture is an industry where VCs post online because they want people to engage with their content. I think a great way to get your name out there is to basically engage with VC's content, whoever that is, right? It's like I personally know the people who are most engaged on my content by name, not because I've ever met them or had a conversation with them, but because I see their name and they're thoughtful on my posts, right? And so I'd say that that's also an underrated way to get your name out there before sending a DM or sending an email, right? If your name is known and then I get an email from you, I'm way more likely to reply because I feel like I know you. It's this perceived feeling of closeness. And so I'd say don't discount like publicly posting and commenting and engaging with them in a thoughtful way, and they're going to appreciate it for sure. And so try that first if they have a public presence. Or another way, if they wrote a blog, let's say, and you really liked it and you have thoughts about it, share it with them in the cold email, right? Be like, I really loved this piece. Like, I agree with that, right? Like, it just goes to show that you are not just reaching out because of the person or the firm or whatever it is that they do. You actually have like followed them, right? Like you followed them, you've kept up with them, you've read their stuff, and now you want to have a thoughtful conversation with them, not just I want to pick your brain. And so I encourage all of you to do that as well.
Perfect. I think that's all the questions. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Jiraj, for taking this again. Thanks, Nicole. Like it's already it's 6 a.m. I guess, like when you joined. So thanks for taking this and making it up. Thank you, guys. See you in the next one.
Awesome.
Bye.
Thank you both.
Awesome. Thanks for having us.
Take care.
Great to do this.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care.